word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with Global Alert News with GeoEngineering Watch Radio for the week of January 16th, 2016. This show is aired throughout Northern California on Saturday mornings on KQMS. KQMS has a large reach in Northern California for those of our internet listeners who might not know that this show is broadcast throughout Northern California. It's a commercial-free hour. It's paid for out of pocket so that we don't have commercials muddying the message that's so dire at this critical time as the walls continue to close in on all of us. Now, a great deal of unfolding stories, certainly too many to cover in 1 hour, but we'll try to hit the high points and get to the meat of the matter, the core of why we face what we face. Because mainstream media has either completely ignored the real stories, the dire stories, the stories with grave importance, or they spin it beyond recognition. And first, something to always keep in mind, to keep in our field of vision. We all live in a cloud of lies, fabricated and spewed out by those in power, those behind the curtain. And who are those behind the curtain? Ultimately, all roads lead to the central bankers, those who print the money. Core group of global power, those who deny this fact have simply not done the research. Let's start with this headline. There's a lot of mainstream media headlines I could go into every week about the Kardashians and all sorts of other idiocracy that we're entertained with on the so-called media, corporate media. But let's get to some real headlines right away because there's a lot to cover today. And I want to, again, try to get at the root of the matter in many aspects. Here's a headline of interest that we should all have long since concluded on our own if we're even halfway awake. Princeton study concludes the United States is no longer a democracy. What a surprise. The report states, a new study from Princeton spells bad news for American democracy, namely that it no longer exists. Asking who really rules, researcher Martin Gilens and Benjamin I. Page argue that over the past few decades, America's political system has slowly transformed from a democracy into an oligarchy, where wealthy elites wield the power. Using data drawn from over 1,800 different policy initiatives from 1981 to 2002, the two conclude that, and it's much worse now, by the way, that's just as far as their research went, the two conclude that rich, well-connected individuals on the political scene now steer the direction of the country, regardless of or even against the will of the majority of the voters. Should this be a surprise to anyone? Really? We have paperless voting machines for a reason. So the votes, the elections can be completely manipulated. We know those who control the money control the entire system. Should not be a surprise. How is it possible that so many people are so distracted by and still buying into the totally scripted political theater that's completely beyond ridiculous? We're given a cast of clowns to choose from, and in the end, our vote didn't matter anyway. Again, on the paperless voting machines designed for one purpose, rigging elections. Are we to choose from the incoherent, incompetent wife of a former, completely corrupt president, the Clintons? Or are we to choose junior number 2, after already having junior number 1 and his father for president? What kind of a system do we live in? How is it possible that we could have husbands and wives as presidents and fathers and sons as presidents? Does that sound democratic in any sense? Of course these people are connected. They're all part of the inner circle of the non-democracy in which we all live. and which most are fine with so long as they can keep going about their personal pursuits of pleasure with no regard for the common good. No regard. It's easy to say you're patriotic. It's easy to say you're a good, upstanding citizen. Doing is a lot different, isn't it? Doing requires actually putting some effort into the common good and not just slapping a bumper sticker on your car that says support our troops. It requires a lot more than that. I know about that. Again, I've worked with horribly disabled Vietnam veterans that should never have been maimed in the first place in a war that was started by a false flag. Historical fact, false flag started Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin, complete lie, in which 60,000 of our sons and daughters died. Does anyone care at this point? They don't seem to. They think that sticking a bumper sticker in their car that says support the troops is enough. They don't have to look for the truth. They don't have to find the truth. They don't have to talk about the truth. They don't have to share the truth with anybody. That's what most people think. That's going to lead us straight to a dead end soon if we stay on that course. In addition to the husband and wife candidates and now we have junior number 2 for candidates in the case of the Bushes, all of them part of the same power structure cabal. We have the rest of the cast of characters of stumbling, ignorant, simplistic, lying hypocrites, all part of the scripted play. While forcing myself to watch the Fox propaganda channel, and yes, all mainstream media is propaganda, no question, CNN, MSNBC, all of them, though factually speaking, Fox would have to be considered the front of the pack. That probably upsets a lot of people because Fox tells them what they want to hear. That we are good, everyone else is bad. Simplistic things like this that simply are not reality. Anyway, I witnessed presidential candidate Marco Rubio comment about how he felt the U.S. Navy sailors were abused. The sailors that Iran captured in their own territorial waters. Rubio said they were so horribly abused, as if we should go to war over this or something. Rubio is very simplistic, by the way, as all the candidates are. Rubio went on to say that if we catch a terrorist, and I'm quoting, if we catch a terrorist, we must send them to Guantanamo and find out everything they know. Rubio's hypocrisy is truly beyond comprehension. The Navy sailors were released unharmed after 10 hours, perhaps humiliated a bit, but unharmed. What would the U.S. have done if a boat full of Iranian military was captured off the coast of, say, Catalina Island? What would they have done? What would we have done? Does Rubio say a word about the prisoners held in Guantanamo without trial or even charges filed against them, many for over a decade? How deep can the hypocrisy go? Is there any mention of the torturing carried out against these men by our own government with no charges filed against them? Marco Rubio's basic philosophy is that we, the U.S., should never admit we are wrong. Rubio is a stellar example of the total hypocrisy that's so epidemic. The power structure, media propaganda machine will continue to feed the public with completely false ideology that we're always right, that we're always good, and anyone who doesn't agree with us should be severely punished or bombed or invaded or many of the things we already know are happening around the world. I would ask this. If any of us had a relationship with a person that behaved in this way, how long would that relationship last? On the other side of the spectrum, we have Bernie Sanders, who says he'll fix everything. Really? The same people that supported Obama are now supporting Sanders. How short can our memories be? How short? How much good for the country and the world was Obama? Is Obama? Barack Obama is another stellar example of unimaginable hypocrisy. How could this man have been given the Nobel Peace Prize while he was allowing U.S. drones to kill innocent civilians in numerous countries? And for the record, by the way, recent studies show 90% of the drone kills are innocent civilians. Don't see our media talking much about that, do you? Not Fox News, not Marco Rubio, who seems to want to beat the drums of war because a few sailors were caught and then released in less than a day. This is the kind of mentality that is pushing the human race to certain extinction. this sort of simplistic, ideological, and completely hypocritical mentality. These are the candidates we have to choose from. It's total delusion to believe or place even a shred of hope in any individual from the intellectually challenged presidential candidate cast of characters. Those behind the curtain control the outcome, period. The rest is just theater. And those behind the curtain, again, are the central bankers. The game's completely rigged from top to bottom. This includes the weather, thanks to the ongoing climate engineering insanity. What in the world does it take to wake the sleeping masses in this country? What does it take? I'll get to the weather after a few other headlines, because the weather and the climate system and the biosphere is completely in free fall, off the rails, and we're all about to hit the wall soon. We're starting to hit it now. And as the biosphere collapses, the economy collapses. As I've said over and over and over, you can't separate the two. No functional biosphere, no functional environment, economy's done. Industrialized civilization is done at that point. How's the economy really right now? How is it? Does anyone really believe the completely fabricated and false unemployment figures? Do we really believe that? The employment rate is down because millions of people have fallen off the back end of the conveyor, and they're thus no longer a part of the equation. And let's not forget, creating new jobs won't matter when the planet is dead. It won't matter. Our entire societal structure has been programmed into complete blindness as to what's really happening. So let's get back to a headline that many will think is a repeat of past headlines, but it's not. It just keeps getting worse. And this is the bottom line to the global economy, the most untarnished economic indicator on the planet, period, that most of our media will not mention because they want to keep the facade going as long as possible because that's their job, to provide cover for the power structure while the power structure maneuvers. In order to provide that cover, they must keep the masses calm. They must keep the masses confused as to the true state of affairs that's unfolding around us all. So here's another headline. This is from Zero Hedge, a strong financial site, or a reputable financial site. And then, again, this is not a repeat of a previous headline. This is simply getting worse. Quote, nothing is moving, end quote. Baltic Dry crashes as insiders warn, quote, commerce has come to a halt. How in the world could the jobs figure be getting better when global shipping has virtually come to a standstill? This report continues. Commerce between Europe and North America has literally come to a halt. For the first time in known history, listen to this, not one cargo ship is in transit in the North Atlantic between Europe and North America. All of them, hundreds of them by the way, are either anchored offshore or in port. Nothing. In the article, massive capital headline, nothing is moving. End of the report, nothing like this has ever happened before. It's a horrific economic sign, proof that commerce is literally stopped. This is what Americans don't know as they rush around in their power structure created delusion, and they're all too willing to do that. We need to wake up. All of us need to wake up. If we're to have any chance of changing course, we need to wake up. Another headline, one of the largest coal companies in the United States just filed for bankruptcy. Don't see that too much on Fox, CNN, or MSNBC when they're telling us how the economy is rebounding and improving. Don't see those headlines, do we? The current paradigm was doomed from the start. The current fossil fuel propelled industrial society paradigm never ever had a chance of continuing because it was not sustainable from the beginning, and we're hitting the wall now. Another headline, RBS tells investors, quote, sell everything. From RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland. The report continues, the Royal Bank of Scotland has advised clients to, quote, brace for a cataclysmic year and global deflationary crisis, warning that the major stock markets could fall by a tremendous amount and oil could hit $16 a barrel. Now, that's the end of all the fracking, thank God, because you can't frack for oil prices less than $50, $60 a barrel. It's a complete loss. But the bigger ramifications are there. The oil market is crashing because industrial society is crashing. And there'll be manipulation along the way. There's no absolutes. There's a lot of string pulling going on. But the overall trend can't be changed. It can only be temporarily disguised by manipulation. Again, as the biosphere collapses, industrialized society must follow. Another headline: Canadians panic as food prices soar on collapsing currency. You can't fix an economy by printing money. Money is not wealth. Resources are wealth. And that doesn't mean precious metals or even oil, because you can't eat either one. Ultimately, food, water, shelter, that's what matters. But if you have the planet completely sacked, pillaged, and plundered, those resources are going to wane. If the biosphere is not functioning, food doesn't grow properly. And I know that firsthand. Our garden on the east side of Lake Shasta, a 100-foot raised bed that I did a lot of work on that used to grow like a jungle with no work at all. We can't grow 10 feet of that now. Why? Because the soils are poisoned from climate engineering, another stellar example of industrialized civilization insanity. Toxic metals in the soils. We have intense UV radiation. People are having trouble growing anything. And again, Redding was known for its trees. Northern California, city of Redding, known for its trees. How well do the trees look now? If you know anything about trees, and I don't care if you know somebody that's a botanist or perhaps an arborist who says there's nothing wrong, then these people are either lying or they don't know much about their profession. The trees are suffering horrifically, not just in Redding, all over the globe. Again, for the record, the rig crash of '08, in which one half of all Americans lost most or all of their savings. What's taking place now is exponentially worse and unstoppable, though the manipulation, again, will continue until the last hour. The last hour when the imploding biosphere and the collapsing industrial civilization make further manipulation impossible to continue. On to the collapsing environment. I want to give more details on this because this is the bottom line on which our lives depend. A new study has been released regarding the effect of clouds on the melting ice in Greenland. And I want to point this out because this leads back into climate engineering, which leads back into which is the epitome of human insanity, again, to play God with the weather. Without public knowledge or consent, and again, the public doesn't want to know. We know that because how many people, any of us in this battle, I couldn't begin to count the amount of people, thousands that I've passed information on in the last 10 years, who simply didn't want to know. They didn't want to know. That's why we're in this mess. People don't want to know. From the study, clouds play a bigger role in the melting of Greenland ice sheet than was previously assumed. Compared to clear skies, clouds enhance the meltwater runoff by a third. They make the warming worse overall. It's what we've always said at geoengineeringwatch.org. It has always been my conclusion based on the data available. Those are the findings of an international study that was coordinated by KU Leuven and published by Nature Communications. The report continues, Greenland's ice sheet is the second largest ice mass in the world. The largest is Antarctica. The ice sheet is losing mass at a high speed and increasingly contributes to the sea level rise on our planet. The role of clouds in this loss of snow and ice has never been calculated before, nor can it be deduced from theoretical climate models. The models are not accurate. For lack of observation, the different models do not agree on the importance of clouds over the ice sheet. The models are invalid. But the actual observations prove that this cloud cover, much of which is from climate engineering, again, the goal of climate engineering, and this is where we look at all of academia and the quote-unquote scientists and how incredibly blind so many of them are. We see this in mainstream media. We see this in the climate science community. How hard is it to figure out that if you put toxic light-scattering particles in the sky, yes, maybe you'll deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, which is the goal of solar radiation management, geoengineering. It's what we see over our heads every day. It's not condensation we're seeing. We're seeing sprayed particulate trails. Look it up, look up the data, find out what's going on above your head. But does it really take 1 million a genius, a scientist, a credentialed person to figure out that you will also trap heat? Is that so hard to figure out? How hard was it for these scientists? How long did they engage in this study to figure out that those particulate clouds are trapping heat? And now we know from observations, making the melting worse, not better. It's what I've always stated at geoengineeringwatch.org. Geoengineering can and does create short-term cooling events at the cost of a worsened overall warming. It's making a bad climate situation worse, not better. Not the only cause of climate change at all. And many people want to believe that there's nothing wrong with the climate except climate engineering. That's also denial. We have environmentalists denying the climate engineering, which is astounding. We have people that acknowledge the climate engineering denying any other source of damage to the climate. Also astounding. All of the above are part of the equation. A few more headlines to try to indicate just how damaged the biosphere already is. Deadly heat wave kills 11 in South Africa as mercury hits 45 degrees Celsius. That's about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. It's shattering records in South Africa. New Zealand, another headline. Smelly red algae covers Northland beaches. This headline continues. Why our beaches are red and smelly? Swaths of beach at Waipai Cove in the Northland are covered with dead and dying seaweed that once was pristine golden sand. The oceans are dying. Same things happening around the globe. Many, many locations. We don't see that in our headlines. We simply don't see it. Most of the time because, again, we're watching the political theater, the cast of clowns with various little dramas staged every day to keep the population entertained while all hell breaks loose around the globe. Another headline. A village in the UK endures 75 days of rain, a record, with more rain on the way. It's so wet that sheep are developing wool rot. Now, on a warming planet, the atmosphere carries more moisture. 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. The only reason it's not raining more in many locations is because of climate engineering. Because when you put particulates in the atmosphere, you block direct sunlight. That reduces evaporation, reduces convection, reduces wind, which reduces rain in those locations. Again, some of the many, countless side effects of climate engineering. The side effects which exponentially outweigh any perceived benefit. But that's why we don't have rain in many locations, because it should be raining more. And we know this. Again, we know this from Mount Pinatubo that blew in 1992 and pumped a bunch of sulfate particulates into the atmosphere. And that one eruption made 1992 the lowest rainfall year ever recorded on the planet by 50%. We know what particulates do to rainfall overall. Where those particulates are sprayed and saturated in the atmosphere, it diminishes and reduces rainfall unless those particulates are larger, when the desired effect is to cause rainfall. So they can adjust, they can create drought and deluge, is what I'm saying. Climate engineering, the climate is much more malleable than people understand, much more malleable. It's delicate. And they have affected it radically, absolutely radically, and poisoned the entire planet in the process. Another headline from Australia, headlines we don't see while we're seeing, again, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and Bernie Sanders, and the rest of the Hillary Clinton, and all the cast of political clowns. Australia, firefighters say climate change fueling disasters. Again, all these headlines are missing one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle of all, geoengineering. How does geoengineering make fires worse? Shreds the ozone layer, disrupts the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, creating drought, blankets the forest floor with toxic, incendiary materials. These heavy metals are incendiaries. When they coat the foliage of the forest, it causes that forest to burn more ferociously. From so many directions, climate engineering is worsening the forest fires along with decimating the entire web of life on the planet. Another headline, South Africa suffers driest year on record in 2015. So it's not just California. It's not just South America. It's not just Australia. It's also South Africa. We don't see these headlines. Another direct result of climate engineering. So the worse the climate gets, the hotter it gets, the more they spray, and the worse everything becomes. Because you can't throw a wrench into this the works of an incredibly complex climate system and expect a good result. You can't get a good result. Climate engineering, again, the epitome of human insanity. So we see all these headlines on what's happening with the climate, but still the total omission, these are lies by omission, the total omission of what's mathematically the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all, climate engineering, the intentional manipulation of Earth's climate system. Let's hope we get at the truth soon. Our legal action at geoengineeringwatch.org, our team of attorneys, hopefully will have the support to keep that moving forward and to get this issue on the radar once and for all. Another headline. These are all from the past week, by the way. Here's why all the bees are dying. This headline outlines the pesticides as the source of the bee colony collapse disorder. This is another lie by omission. How could you have a headline that blames everything on the pesticides almost a year after we got peer-reviewed study that the bees are packed full of aluminum, that the bees are dying 1,000 miles into the wilderness, exponential distances away from farms? How could it just be the chemicals? How could it just be the farm chemicals, which are bad? I don't deny that. But there's obviously a much bigger factor, and I've communicated this myself to some of the head bee people in the country. They won't listen. They don't want to know. Even though this is their profession, and keeping the bees alive is what their livelihoods depend on, they don't want to know. So even though we have peer-reviewed studies saying the bees are so full of aluminum that they're exhibiting symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia, and I challenge anybody, everybody, search that online. Just search bees aluminum, and you'll find peer-reviewed study that the bees have as much as 70 times more aluminum in their system than it takes to cause Alzheimer's or dementia in a human being. No wonder they're dying. It's a wonder any of them are alive at all, because the whole planet is blanketed in these toxic metals and particulates. Same with the whales. Same situation. We have a study of 1,000 whales from around the globe done in 2010 that contain, quote, jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in their tissue, as do all of us. That's why now 1 in 3 seniors in the U.S. dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. That's why MIT is telling us right now that in less than a decade, every other child will have autism. Doesn't mean the child that's not diagnosed is going to be healthy, because he won't be. And with all the other converging catastrophes, will any of us be around by then anyway? Again, our equation is very, very non-linear. I'm challenging people. Investigate what I'm saying. Please don't believe a word I'm saying. Please just investigate it. And we have, while all this is going on in our skies, we have the Weather Channel liars explaining away completely engineered weather whiplash as being natural. That's their job on the Weather Channel, and all the other power structure owned weather disseminating agencies, and the power structure owns all of them. We know this factually. Weather Channel is owned by Bain Capital, Blackstone, and the rest of the global corporate entities. Rothschild's own Weather Central, Monsanto owns Climate Corp, the list goes on. They have to control the message, because all they have to do is tell the population it's all fine, it's just natural. People want to believe that, and so they ram their heads back in the sand and go on about their business. This is not going to save us if we don't face reality. And the weather whiplash is becoming horrific. We have places across the U.S. and other places on the globe that can swing 50, 60 degrees for the high temperature in a single day, up and down. The roller coaster that is the sign of a climate system that's coming apart because it's being forced by climate engineering in ways that is making an already bad situation exponentially worse. This is what's happening, and we're allowing it to happen because we're looking the other way. We need people to wake up and, again, support the effort to raise awareness. Now, the refugee crisis, again, that's going to continue. That's a huge factor, and it's something that's being used by the power structure for their own agenda. And many causes in the Middle Eastern countries, as I've said over and over, those countries were subjected to horrific drought. South Africa, I just mentioned, record drought there as well. All a result of climate engineering. That's the greatest single factor. I realize we have the climate science community telling us we should expect these record droughts with a warming planet. But that's not really true in the overall picture. It may be true in certain regions, but overall, we should have more rain on a warming planet, period. 7% more moisture for every degree of Fahrenheit is huge, or centigrade, it's huge. So we are already we are seeing an underreporting of global temperatures everywhere we check, 4 and 5 degree underreporting. That's huge again. So what does that mean? It means we may already be 3 degrees C past baseline. That's almost 6 degrees Fahrenheit past baseline before the Industrial Revolution. What does that mean? It means we should have exponentially more rain overall around the planet right now. So again, we have the denial of the climate science community, blaming everything on CO2, when CO2 is not the only problem. It's a big problem, but it is not the only problem. Climate engineering is an even bigger problem, and we have no acknowledgement of that. So we have a lot of ignorance, even from the quote-unquote experts, and this is willful ignorance. This is good for their jobs, it's good for their paychecks, good for their pensions, to go along with whatever they're told to go along with, so that's exactly what they do. We have a lack of honor, a lack of virtue, a lack of courage. So I want to read a small statement from Robert Proctor. He's a science historian from Stanford University, titled "The Man Who Studies the Spread of Ignorance." Quote, "We live in a world of radical ignorance. The marvel is that any kind of truth cuts through the noise. Even though knowledge is accessible, it does not mean it is accessed," Proctor warns. He continues, "Although for most things this is trivial, for bigger questions of political and philosophic import, the knowledge people have often comes from faith or tradition or propaganda more than anywhere else." That should alarm the hell out of all of us. Think about that. The knowledge of our society, for most people in our society, more often than not, comes from, quote, faith or tradition or propaganda, not from facts, not from research. That should alarm all of us. I want to go into a short rant to sum all this up that outlines humanity's apparent bent toward its own suicide. And it's important to consider all this in context, because this is really the core of the issue. Industrialized and militarized civilization continues to grind up what's left of the planet's life support systems. This is fact. We're grinding nature up for a profit to increase the expansion of the military industrialized cancer. For a moment, let's consider a few points to back up that statement. What are just a few of the most glaring acts of the human race which make clear we're not behaving like a sane species? We're absolutely not. We seem bent on our own suicidal tendencies. This is just statistical fact. Let's consider this. We've constructed enough nuclear weaponry to exterminate life on Earth some 12,000 times over. Is that rational? Simply asking the question, is that rational? I hear from people all the time, they, the proverbial they, those in power, central bankers, wouldn't do this to themselves. And that's their excuse to go on about their denial. It's simply not supportable by the data. They, the proverbial they, the central bankers, those in power, have absolutely done this to themselves. The human race has shot themselves not in the foot but in the head many times over. And we're about to reap the repercussions from that. We've detonated some 2,000 nuclear bombs, apparently just to be sure they work. And yes, we had to find out 2,000 times over. A dozen or so detonations didn't do it. We had to keep going. And these detonations have contaminated everything on the planet. Everything is contaminated from the nuclear fallout from these detonations. Not the only source of contamination for nuclear radiation, by the way, but one source. We've cut down or been directly responsible for the death of almost 60% of the trees that were on the planet at the dawn of civilization. And that's not just cutting them down. Again, forests are dying everywhere around the globe right now. It's such a horrific rate that this statistic is likely incorrect even now. It's accelerating so rapidly. We have recent statistics from the Sierras, upper altitudes in the Sierras, where 80% of the trees are dead, not from fire. They're dead from many of the factors I've already mentioned, many related directly to climate engineering. Lack of water, the rain that does fall is toxic. Bioavailable toxic heavy metals like aluminum have effects on the root systems, which are known, documented, and studied. Intense UV radiation cooking the trees from the top down. Many factors related directly to climate engineering again. So the trees are being decimated around the globe. Again, I want to outlay all the symptoms of humanity's apparent bent to exterminate itself by trying to use the same technology as the technological god that people seem to worship and feel because they've seen too many science fiction movies that this god of technology will save them. This is where technology has brought us so far. I'll continue with this report, this rant, if you will. We have Monsanto re-engineering our crops into frankenfoods that can tolerate the extra massive dose of pesticides that then the happy consumers get to gobble up. The genetically modified pesticide-soaked smorgasbord. That's what we get in the market. We haphazardly drill holes in the seafloor so that unimaginable amounts of oil can spew out and permanently contaminate the life-giving seas. Again, all these factors of the human race's apparent bent on its own suicide for the goal of keeping industrialized civilization in its current form going as long as possible, at any cost. Other factors. The oil that we do manage to get to the surface, we then burn so that it can build up the greenhouse gases that are trapped in the atmosphere. How much do we put up there a day, by the way? 100 million tons of CO2 goes into the atmosphere every single day. That's 85,000 barrels of oil every single day. And contrary to what many would like to believe, because they're watching mainstream corporate media and all the propaganda from Fox, CNN, and MSNBC, many people want to believe that there's no problem with the climate. That all that pollution, do they think it just floats off into space somewhere and disappears? Where does the pollution go? No, it's trapped here in the atmosphere. It's trapped here. The Earth has an energy balance. It had an energy balance. In the last 10,000 years of the human race was an equilibrium in Earth's climate never before seen. It was very balanced. How can we possibly do what we're doing to the planet, destroying the trees, pumping 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every single day, and on top of all of it, climate engineering? How can we possibly think that that's not going to affect the energy balance? It has radically affected the energy balance, in fact, so much so that the planet is currently warming at the rate of 4 to 5 Hiroshima bomb explosions, the thermal energy contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima bomb explosions every single second. That's equivalent to 400,000 nuclear detonations per day. That's how fast the planet's warming. And much of that warmth has gone into the oceans. And the oceans are absolutely becoming scaldingly hot. That's why we now have the strongest January Atlantic hurricane ever. We have records being broken everywhere, and this is in spite of a lot of data falsification to the downside, not the upside as people like to believe, even though I know people who live in California where it's been incredibly hot. Everything's dying. They're tearing orchards out with excavators on the main corridor through California. I mean, the temperatures are unimaginably hot. Warmest year ever recorded in California by about 5 or 6 degrees, obliterated the records, and yet people here still buy into the global warming is a hoax lie. Whatever you want to believe is the cause, the planet's in total meltdown, and I've just named a bunch of causes that how could we possibly deny? To deny all these causes, again, would be like to say that what's happening is natural in any sense, or to deny it. It's like finding, as I've mentioned before, an example I use, a body with 5 bullets in the back of its head and saying, people die, it's natural. There's nothing natural about what we've done to the planet. We blow up mountains to extract the coal underneath in order to burn that. Also, again, all that I'm laying out is trying to point out the human race's apparent bent on its own self-destruction that people want to ignore until they absolutely have to face it. And by the time they have to face it, it's far too late. We've gone through the guardrail and we're going to the bottom of the canyon. So we blow off these mountaintops, and yeah, much of the waste is spilled into lakes and streams along the way, but that's just business as usual in most people's minds, certainly in the industrial complex minds. That's just part of business as usual. And let's not forget the latest toxic spewing hole that the human race has punched into the planet, which is pouring methane and hydrogen sulfide all over neighborhoods in Southern California with no end in sight. We have the Gulf oil spill, now we have the massive methane spewing hole, and by the way, we have methane spewing out of the Arctic. Massive methane deposits are starting to release. Geoengineering has helped that to happen, and in the attempt to hide the problem, which climate engineers are doing, they're pounding away at the Arctic, trying to keep what's left of the ice, but actually making the situation worse overall, not better, as the Greenland study already highlighted. Yes, they can block the sun, which has some daytime cooling effects at the cost of a worsened overall warming by trapping heat at night. How simple is this? Yet we have a military-industrial complex and a power structure cabal that's bent on this climate engineering insanity, not because it's for the common good, but because it's for their own agenda, because it's used as weather warfare also. It's not about the common good. And again, if the holes we punch into the planet, like the one in Southern California that's spewing methane everywhere, if they don't extract some resource out of that hole, then what do they use those holes for? The empty wells, if you will. They pump untold billions of gallons of unimaginably toxic fracking fluid into the Earth's strata and poison everything underground, including aquifers. How sane is that? Let's pump billions of gallons of poisonous fluid into the planet to hide the waste. That's the mentality. Hide it. Don't fix it, hide it. The forests that are now cut down or poisoned to death are often burned away to make way for cows. How smart is that? Lots and lots of cows, by the way. You can't have too many Big Macs, and we need more of them, it seems. So let's cut all our forests down so we can have more Big Macs. And what about nuclear power, which we're astoundingly told is a form of, quote, renewable energy? Let's consider this for a moment. We have a leaking nuclear plants all over the globe. We have 3 China syndrome full meltdowns right now in Fukushima with no known technology to deal with the nuclear spewing volcano that may kill us all if other converging catastrophes don't do the job first, if we stay on this course. It's up to us to change course. With all this considered, the human race doesn't have the slightest bit of concern about this situation. Of course not. We have 60 more nuclear plants on the books right now being built and adding to the 400 already in operation. So we have 1 nuclear facility in total meltdown, no known technology to fix it, and we're building 60 more, and people say though they would not do this to themselves. Those in power would not do this to themselves. Another example of them doing this to themselves. Now let's add the biggest block of human insanity of all, again, global climate engineering, which is the absolute epitome of human hubris. Think about this. Let's spray highly toxic light-scattering nanoparticulates into the atmosphere, tens of millions of tons annually, by the way, an unimaginable amount, and block the sun out so that we can keep business as usual under the toxic sunshade for as long as possible. We can't keep burning 4 billion gallons of oil a day, manufacturing hundreds of millions of oil-burning cars, building ever bigger McMansions, and taking ocean-polluting cruises is often impossible. We can't do all this and expect life to continue on our planet. It won't. And for people on these cruises, don't get too near the west coast of North America, because if you do, you're going to see beaches littered with dead marine animals. Dead seabirds littering beaches in Alaska and other locations. Look it up. Don't believe me. Please look it up. Dead whales everywhere. Back to the military, the Navy using depleted uranium ammunition off our coast, geoengineering, UV radiation from its shredded ozone layer killing plankton, oceans that are warming at a radical speed which is deoxygenating them, the food chain collapses and everything dies. So while people are out taking cruises, again, don't get too near the coast. You might not like what you see. And about that depleted uranium ammunition, again, that the Navy is using, our Navy using for practice off the U.S. West Coast, along with the new sonar system, that decimates marine mammals, which they've officially stated may die by the millions due to their activities. This is what the Navy has stated on their environmental impact report. We may kill about 10 million mammals, but we need to practice war games off the U.S. West Coast. This is society bent on its own self-destruction, with a population that doesn't seem to care, that seems to want to go along with this, so long as they don't have to actually do anything for the common good. We're going to pay the price for this very soon. And if you question such things, and I know this firsthand, I went over it last week as I was more or less assaulted on the air by another host of a radio show because I had the audacity apparently to criticize our U.S. military. Know this, and I care about our brothers and sisters in the military, by the way. I've stated I've supported DAV and VFW for 20 years, worked with rehabbing NAM vets, but I also ask our military to show some responsibility to not carry out orders that are harmful to your own countrymen, your own country, your own planet, your own lives. You have a responsibility not to follow such orders. So in our society, we're not allowed to question our military without being suspected of being a traitor or a terrorist or kicked out of the herd, if you will. It's our job to tell the truth, no matter what. One thing I forgot to mention, the spraying of the atmosphere being done as part of the climate engineering insanity is destroying, as I said earlier, the ozone layer. And the ramifications to this, it's not only totally disrupting the climate, but the UV radiation is so intense, it's burning the bark off the sun-exposed sides of the trees. As I mentioned, the trees dying in Redding and other locations around the globe. Take a look. Take a look at the sun-exposed side. And although some species don't show it as much as others, this is absolutely blatantly obvious around town. And in addition, a greater risk to this shredded ozone layer. Think about this. Back to Fukushima, back to the human race is bent on self-destruction. So now geoengineering shredding our ozone layer has left us perilously exposed to solar flares, coronal mass ejections, which, if they happen, shut down grid power around the globe, which causes nuclear plants not to be able to cool themselves, which may cause Fukushima times 100 or 200. Yet another example of the human race's bent toward self-destruction. Nuclear power is a lethal threat to the human race. It's already causing cataclysmic and irreparable damage by the spewing nuclear volcano Fukushima, which I've already mentioned. And yet we're told by some, even quote-unquote environmentalists like James Hansen from NASA, that this is some sort of alternative we should look at as a green power source. That's not sanity. Nuclear power is a death sentence for us if it continues, and we need to start looking at shutting down, cold shutdowns of nuclear power plants before we have a whole bunch of Fukushimas erupting all at once, which is an inevitability on this current course. And again, as the biosphere continues to implode, so much of it because the human race is behaving very poorly, to say the least. We're told by our so-called leaders that we need to pour our last remaining resources into making even more weapons and an even larger military so that we can, quote, be extra safe on our now completely dead planet. This is the world we live in. This is the human race's propensity towards its own self-destruction. It's not going to change unless we change it. It got this bad because the majority of the population has so far been all too willing to look the other way and go along with the insanity in order to keep their own personal parties going. I know that many are busy keeping their heads above the financial waterline. But why are so many so far in debt? Because they've been active participants in the materialism excess that's been a road marker on our path to this dark corner that we're all now in. I fully recognize that we have a power structure at the head of all this that's a criminal cabal to the core, but let's not overlook the participation of the population that so far has wanted nothing to do with truly examining the facts and subsequently exhibiting a sense of responsibility toward the whole. So what do we do now? I take a great deal of criticism for delivering a dire message of reality, because I'm told that, quote, I don't really tell people how they can fix the situation, how they can hit the reset button, so to speak. I cannot state such a solution because the notion that there's such a solution is just more delusion, and I refuse to participate in the perpetual denial. That's how we got here. What I've always said is this, and I say this now, by the way, as well. No matter how dark the horizon, we have a responsibility to do our individual parts for the common good. If we truly love our children and the planet and the web of life on which our lives and our children's lives depend, we have an absolute responsibility to make the fight for the common good our top priority. Doing the right thing does not come with guarantees of success. It never has. Never. At no point in human history has there been any guarantee of life or success at anything we do. But it's our responsibility to try. Doing the right thing is always the right thing to do. Always. No matter what. If we still have the ability to take a quantum leap in the right direction, we have a responsibility to try. This is not just an option. It's an absolute responsibility. We have the personal freedom to ignore this responsibility, but what does that make us? The fight for the common good starts with a sincere and unbiased search for the truth, no matter how bitter. No matter how bitter. Again, psychoanalyst Scott Peck, who wrote the book The Road Less Traveled, stated the hallmark of a healthy human mind and psychology is the unswaying willingness to examine the truth and face it no matter how dire that truth is. That's a healthy mind. The boat is sinking and we're all on it. In such a scenario, what's the logical top priority? To plug the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. What is that hole? What's the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat? The greatest and most immediate threat at this moment is the ongoing climate engineering, weather warfare assault, geoengineering. If you're willing to fight for the common good, if you're willing to make your voice heard while there's yet time to do so, find out what's going on around you. You can't do it by watching football games or the long list of other activities that Americans engage in. It's interesting, I saw that after one of the Super Bowls, there was something like 700,000 people in the streets for this event. How many people do we see in the streets protesting the fact that we're all being sprayed like rats by our own government? It's decimating the climate system. They decide where it rains, how much, how toxic it is. This is being decided by your government. And if you don't believe it, you haven't done your research. Because the facts to back up what I'm saying are there, including congressional documents, presidential documents, patents, film footage of the tanker spraying, lab tests from around the globe, science studies. Take a look. Turn off the corporate media propaganda machine and take a look. Share what you learn with others. Help us to reach a critical mass of awareness in regard to climate engineering insanity first. By the way, which is also biological warfare due to the massive toxic fallout, which is contaminating the entire planet and which we all get to inhale with every breath. Doesn't matter whether you believe this or not. It's verifiable fact, and lab tests have proved it. Denial will be our collective end if it's not broken. Denial can feel good until it hits you in the head like a brick that you never saw coming because you were trying as hard as you could to keep your eyes wide shut. We must do our individual part in moving the ball up the field for the greater good. This cannot be done unless one is on the playing field, so to speak, hiding in the locker room in the hopes that others will move the ball up the field won't help change the course of certain disaster that we're all currently on. You must engage in the game. All of us are needed. The majority of ideologies and opinions that have been built on carefully crafted propaganda fed to us by those in power is unimaginable. We have to disconnect from ideologies and traditions and build our conclusions on facts, verifiable facts. To blindly defend such mindsets that are not, and conclusions that are not built on fact, without true investigation, without true examination of all the related material, is a grave mistake. Let us all make the fight for the greater good our top priority. We must make every day count. Our situation is much more dire and much more immediate than most people yet understand. Share credible data with those around you. Help us to wake the masses to what's unfolding, starting with the climate engineering assault on the web of life. If we can reach a critical mass on this issue, then many other wheels will turn in our favor. Many other issues will be brought into the light of day as well. Those that are participating in the destruction and their families will know that they are part of the insanity. They are part of the destruction. And I believe many of them, like our military brothers and sisters, will refuse to participate in this insanity. It's causing the demise of the planet on which their own children depend. It's ruining the health of all of us, the environment, everything that we need to survive. Again, many of our military brothers and sisters, I believe, that are being used in ways that harm their own country and citizens will refuse to continue participating in this insanity. If our combined efforts can pull back the curtain on the power structure and their cloud of deception and destruction, we can yet change the course of the Titanic on which we are all currently passengers, all of us. And again, hiding in your cabin on the Titanic won't save you from what's coming. Life's got to be about something. If it's not about fighting for the common good, what's it about? If we claim to love our children, we have an obligation to take a stand to try to protect what's left of their futures while we can. Make your voice heard in the critical fight for the common good. GeoEngineeringWatch.org is a repository of data For this purpose, no advertising, no politics. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.